Check out nessp.info for direct links and deals on the site Bet Us for 125% off your first three deposits in NFL and college odds for upcoming games, Major League Baseball and NBA futures, and boxing wagers. Also, check out Fanatics sportswear for your favorite teams, and also network merchandise, retro, Northeast streaming sports, national streaming sports, big football, and the Mac and Jack Sports Show t-shirts. Coffee mugs are coming soon.
If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist. My name is Frank Lotierzo, full-time observer, part-time writer, joined by former 6-term president of the BWAA, Jack Hirsch. Jack, how you doing tonight?
Hey, very good, Frank.
Jack?
A lot of sports going on. You know, I was watching a little of baseball, the Mets making the playoffs, making a dramatic come-from-behind victory. That was pretty entertaining.
Okay. Well, what I'm concerned about is I need the Phillies eliminated. I had a good day yesterday with the Eagles getting beat, although I'm not going to try to get used to it or brag about it because they did have injuries. And in about 45 minutes, my Miami Dolphins will step on the field for the 4th time this year, and they will leave 1-3, even though they're playing a team that's winless in the Titans, Jack, who they usually beat teams like the Titans and the Panthers. The organization is a disaster, dysfunctional, and it's hard being a fan.
Why can't you pick fights as well as you do the Miami Dolphin games and seasons?
Well, you're the only person that thinks I don't pick them good.
Well,
and I think if we went back and did a record on this show, I'm way ahead of you.
Frank, you have an army of supporters who they even embarrass you, because they hedge in their predictions, and then when it's all done and over with, they talk so forcefully and they say, just as I said, just as I predicted, but they never say it beforehand. I guess I miss it, Frank. I miss what they say beforehand, because I always manage to hear what your friends say afterwards. They always right on the money afterwards.
All I can tell you is this, Jack. You can call me a lot of things, but a hedger is not one of them. I don't hedge, but speaking of hedging, let's start off with this. There was a female fight Friday night on ESPN that I caught by luck. And it was a WBA welterweight fight between Michaela Meyer and the champion, which was Sandy Ryan.
And he won WBO welterweight championship. But I haven't covered for boxing news, so I'm pretty familiar with the show.
Now, you know, back in the 90s, I trained and worked the corner of a couple of female boxers, Kathy Collins, Leah Mellinger.
Oh, I didn't know that, Frank. Oh.
And then I got away from it and didn't think much about it, didn't pay attention to it, but I caught this fight Friday night. And, Jack, it was an outstanding fight. And as I posted, I was impressed with both fighters as far as their conditioning, their chin, their body work, their ability to change strategy in the middle of the fight, and, you know, their form and the way they look like real boxers, not like all arm punching, flailing punches. The fight was a majority decision in favor of Meyer. I thought it was a 6-4 fight, maybe 5-4-1. I thought she edged it out. I wouldn't have a problem with a draw. And plus, you had the rivalry there. But, Jack, I have to say this. I really enjoyed that fight.
Well, I had it scored a draw for what it's worth, 5
I don't
rounds
have a
apiece.
problem with that.
But I want you to consider this, okay? And this is no put down of women's boxing because Maya and Ryan are real fighters, okay? And most of the female fighters who enter the ring are real fighters. They're sincere. They've got skills, but there's not that much female competition. To keep
Right.
in mind that Sandy Ryan had, what did she have, like 9 fights?
I think she was 7-1-1.
And this was like her third title defense, you know? And it's not like she had an extended amateur background the way a Vasily Lomachenko or an Alexander Usyk had, where these guys have had so many amateur fights, you could fast track them to a world title. Like Lomachenko in his second fight could be fighting for a world title as a professional because he's so polished from all the amateur contests. But I want you to consider this. The men fight 12 3-minute rounds. The women fight 10 2-minute rounds in title matches. So the women fight a maximum of 20 minutes as opposed to the men fighting a max of 36 minutes.
Right.
And the women fights are normally very exciting because they don't have to fight 36 minutes. And they have 2-minute rounds. So I want them to keep the 2-minute rounds. If they had 3-minute rounds, the way Amanda Serrano was arguing about, her fight wouldn't have been nearly as good with Katie Taylor. If the men, let me throw this at you, had 10 2-minute rounds, their fights would be more entertaining. You know,
Absolutely.
I mean, it's something to think about, Frank. I even thought to myself, hey, for those people who want to bring back the 15-round fights, how would you feel about the men going 15 2-minute rounds, a total of 30 minutes, a total of a half hour of actual fighting? I think it would make a more entertaining fight. They'd pace themselves just a little less than in 12 3-minute rounds.
I think that would probably be the case, Jack, but I want 15 3-minute rounds. I want to separate the men from the boys. And I do believe that we're going to see the day. Maybe you and I won't, but I believe that the day's out there where we're going to see the women's, either the rounds or the minutes of the rounds increase down the road as the fight of as women's boxing evolves a little more. I think we're probably going to get to that. But even with what you said, Jack, the competition isn't there, but you could tell that those two ladies train with men. They have a clue about what they're doing. I was very impressed with Michaela Meyer's body punching. Ryan was the harder puncher, but Meyer made up for it with volume and going to the head and body and mixing it up. And that's what I think pulled out the fight for her, only so slightly. Again, I didn't have a problem with the draw, but I think both girls showed well.
Maya was an Olympian. She's been boxing a long time. So Maya's, a real fight as far as big.
That's a big advantage.
Sandy Ryan does things a little more physical. There was a storyline before the fight with paint thrown on Sandy Ryan as she was leaving her hotel room. Something is out of whack, Frank. Just consider this. Hear me out for a second. She's a woman. She's coming to New York, I think, for the first time. She fought once in Orlando, but she's from the UK. She's on completely strange territory.
Right.
What was she doing, leaving her hotel alone to walk to the garden? You mean her trainer, a manager, her mini entourage, the people that are with her, no one accompanied her?
Nobody was around her, Jack?
Well, no. She was walking alone. I assume the hotel was across the street. Regardless, what the heck that's why something is off here, Frank. Why wasn't anyone accompanying her? All these champions have at least a tiny entourage, or they at least have a friend or two walking with them. Okay.
I don't get, but where are you going?
She's going to the garden.
No, but I'm saying, where are you going with this? Are you saying that was a absent? Her corner maybe did her wrong by not being with her.
Corner. If that's the case, exactly, they're partly at fault. Why wasn't someone from her corner, her trainer, walking with her to the arena? I don't want to hear, oh, we'll meet you at the garden. What time you showing up? You should be checking on her. What time you leaving to go? I'll meet you by your room. I'll meet you outside your room. At the very least, I'll meet you down at the lobby at the very least. And we're going
That's
to
a
go
good
to the
point.
garden together. No one's saying that. That's why something is out of whack here because no one is bringing that up. And we see the picture of her leaving a hotel and paint is all of a sudden thrown on her. No description, no anything. And another thing, Frank, I want you to consider all these hotels, it's on video, it's on camera.
Everywhere we go today is recorded.
How come it hasn't come out in the news yet? What happened or whatever. Something is out of whack here. That's all I'm saying.
Jack, I never thought of it that way. And after the way you insulted me in the beginning of the show, I hate to give you a compliment, but you did. Yeah. That is pretty good. You thought of something. I didn't think of that.
Your followers, not you, Frank.
I didn't think of that.
Your friends I'm talking about who are know-it-alls after the fact. They post stuff like they're big experts after the fact, but before the fight.
Jack, be nice to me or I'm going to post your phone number and have them all bombard you with text messages. I didn't think of that. That's a good point. And what was the purpose? What did that do? I mean, I don't think Michaela Meyer knew anything about it. I mean, somebody wanted to unnerve Sandy, so she fought the wrong fight.
But keep in mind, this is the biggest sports incident coming not quite on the same level as an assault as we had Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding. If it really was any Michaela Meyer followers and they did anyone associated with her at all, that's serious business. You throw paint on someone. That's even Michaela Meyer said that's crossing a line.
Absolutely.
That's crossing a line. I mean, you don't go there with that. But why wasn't anyone with Sandy Ryan from her camp?
Yeah, that's pretty reckless, actually.
She's a female too. This isn't like one of the Klitschko's, and I could tell you a little bit of a funny story, Frank. Vitaly Klitschko, when I was president of the Boxing Writers Association of America, him and Vladimir were honored with the Honesty and Integrity Award in boxing and the Good Guy Award. I forgot which. Courage, maybe in overcoming adversity or something. Vladimir didn't come to New York. Vitaly came to New York to get his award on his own dime. He had a hotel, but I got a few security guys who were going to walk him back to his hotel, stand around him at the bank with the people don't overcrowd him. It's time to leave. And the 4 guys in tuxedos dressed up, professionally, are walking with Vitaly. He goes, please, you don't need to do it. And they say, no, we got it. It's our job. We have to do it. We're obligated. So Vitaly then, he turns to, me and the other guy and he says, I want to go back alone, and we told him, well, we promised you people. Back in Ukraine, we were going to do this and that. And then he said, anyone who starts with me on the street is going to have big trouble. He said it with a snarl. So then everyone backed off and he walked with his friend to his hotel room. He had that mojo about him. Anyone messes with me on the street, I'm going to hurt him. He wasn't defensive. He would have crushed him. That was his attitude.
Well, let me tell you something, Jack. I've been around Vitaly a few times, and you got to really be lathered up to want to try that guy. He's 6'7". He did some kick fighting. He's a former champ. He only lost 2 times in the ring, and both times were because of an injury or an injury in a cut. He was never off his feet. He's not the guy you want to pick on.
But my point is, Sandy Ryan, they don't even know she's a boxer, female walking. Well, not that it's unsafe for female to walk in New York. It was still daylight out, okay? And it's the heart of the city, basically. I don't mean she was walking. It's not a dangerous situation. You leave your hotel room and you're walking to the garden. I just find it odd. You're a champion boxer and you're walking all alone. And you're female, and no one's accompanying you in a strange country.
You're right.
Strange place.
Jack,
I want an explanation.
when you speak of the Klitschko's, that reminds me, I went down to see the Mercer Vladimir fight. That was in 2002. And I'll tell you off the air, but there's a writer and a guy that covers boxing who you and I have never discussed, but I know you know him, and I'll tell you off the air.
Okay.
He went on and on and on and on, telling me how Vladimir was the better fighter of the two brothers. And at that time, Vladimir was standing back as far as you could in the room against the wall during the press conference, and nobody was paying attention to him. It was all Vladimir. So this writer that told me about how great Vladimir was, he went on and on and on. So I ran into him about maybe 6 years later, and I said, you studied two fighters, and you couldn't even get it right who was the better one between the two of them. I said, you only had to study two, and you still got it wrong. And that's like, when I think of the Klitschko's, I think back to that, how Vladimir was the star, Vitaly, nobody was looking at. And a couple years after that, Vitaly passed Vladimir off the Lewis fight. And then, Vladimir had a couple of bad showings in 2003 and 4 with Corey Sanders and Layman Brewster.
Let me ask you this. I think I asked you this once. If you combine the two Klitschko's, make them into one person and give them all their fights, add their full record, their full accomplishments, if you make them into one, I think you may be talking of a top 5 heavyweight of all time.
I think combined, Jack, they're like 112-6 with 95 knockouts.
Yeah, definitely. And you combine all their qualities and so on. But it was but getting back to female fight, very good fight. Michaela Maia and Stanley Ryan, entertaining fight, very close. I thought it could have gone either way. One judge had it a draw the way I did. The other had it 6 rounds to 4. The other 7 rounds to 3.
That was off, Jack. 7 rounds to 3 was off.
You know something? I'm not going to go crazy over a score like that. I thought it was off, but I'm willing to give a judge a benefit of the doubt that they just saw a fight differently. When you, like, if a judge turned in a 9 rounds to 1 scorecard already, that's going to get my yang up. 7-3, I think, was a little extreme, but I'm willing to give a judge a benefit of the doubt. They looked at round the two differently.
All right, Jack, nice. You walked right into my trap. Let me ask you a question. Okay, I'm going to assume that you believe that you know what you're watching when you score a fight. And I believe you know what you're watching when you score a fight, okay? So if I don't see a fight and you say, Frank, fighter X won pretty conclusively, and the judges saw it another way, I'm going to lean towards maybe what you said about what happened without me seeing it. So here's my question. If you and I watch the same fight, let's just say we're at your house and we're watching it on TV and we're both the same distance away from the TV, nobody else is in the room, you and I aren't talking, we're just watching the fight, at the end of each round, marking down who we gave it to. How many rounds do you think would be okay for us to disagree on?
I bet there would be a few, Frank, but it's important what you come up with at the end. Because if I give 2 rounds to fighter A and you give 2 to fighter B, then you might give another 2 that I didn't to fighter A that I would give to fighter B. I'm a big believer these things even out. I actually did something like that once. The first Shane Mosley, Oscar De La Hoya fight, I went to the home of one of the professional boxing judges, Tony Parlillo, and John McKay, a well-known boxing judge now, boxing judge at the time too. He was there to score the fight off TV for a story I was doing. They got permission from the commission. The third judge was supposed to be Steve Weisfeld. Steve didn't show up that night. He called. He had to cancel. So we got Wayne Kelly, the referee, who lived in the neighborhood of Tony Paolillo, and the three of them scored the fight. I scored at 115, 113 for Mosley, the first fight, remember, with Oscar. Both judges scored the fight, Tony Paolillo and John McKay, 6 rounds apiece, a draw. Wayne Kelly gave an edge to Oscar, but Paolillo and McKay agreed with me in 11 out of the 12 rounds. 11 out of 12. But because their final score draw hit home hard, because you could see Mosley had an edge. But it was only one round that they disagreed, yet the final score means everything at the end, because that's what we base our opinions on.
You know, Jack, I think you're right about that. But I actually think if both minds are sharp and know what they're looking at, I just think there should be an agreement on the round, just like, and I'm going to take the most famous fight in history and I'm going to explain it. The first Ali Frazier fight. Most people think because Arthur McCanny had the fight 8-6-1, which was the closest of the 3 judges had it, they think he had the best score. But I've gone back and I've compared my score, and I actually think Artie Idella, who scored at 9-6, had the best score that night, going by the rounds that he gave each fighter. Arthur McCanny gave Ali a couple of rounds in that fight. And like you said, it balanced out in the end, but he gave Ali a couple of rounds in that fight. I don't know what he was looking at. There was actually no person on this earth that could think that Muhammad Ali won round 6 and Arthur McCanny scored it. So to me, when you say the score is what matters, I do agree with that. But I do think there's something to be said on the rounds that we agree on. And off topic a little bit, Joe Bergman just said that it's being reported that Pete Rose has passed.
Oh, boy. Oh.
That's huge.
Yeah, wow.
Jack, talk for a minute. I'm going to go to Yahoo Sports to see if they say anything. If there's a
oh, boy.
Oh, yeah, it says the top story. Pete Rose, MLB all-time hit leader, reportedly dies at 83.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't the
His agent confirmed it.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you hear news like that, it hits home. I mean, and the talk with him being in the Hall of Fame, while he would maybe still be alive.
He'll get in now.
Recently had a documentary. No, I don't think they're going to put him in now for sure. I mean, it's going to be quite a while if he ever gets in. No, but I hate to veer towards boxing because, when you hear those.
Joe agrees with me, Jack. I think they'll induct him now.
Well, if it were the sport of boxing, he would have been inducted a while ago. I mean, just consider this. I mean, Jake LaMotta admits to throwing a fight. He gets in the Hall of Fame. All these boxers who are caught being on steroids, they get in the Hall of Fame. I mean, no one gets kept out based on conduct or what they do outside of the arena.
Jack, let me tell you something. And I guess through Muhammad Ali, I realize this, but I don't care what the sport is. If there is an athlete who you are drawn to, okay, you will automatically, by osmosis, follow that sport. And if it's a team sport, you will follow his team, okay? And let me just tell you this. As a little kid growing up, I had 4 idols: Ali, Bobby Orr, Pete Rose, and Larry Zonka. And I have to admit, Pete Rose passing does hit me, because if it wasn't for Pete Rose, Jack, I would have no interest in baseball. And when Pete Rose retired as a player, I stopped watching baseball, because Rose played baseball with passion and aggression and like it was football. And I love the guy. I love them.
Pete Rose was a boxing fan, not a boxing fan like you and I in the traditional sense. He enjoyed going to the fights. You'd see him, at the fights. Maybe it was just an evening of entertainment for him more than being a true fight fan. But, he seemed to enjoy boxing. We never heard about him betting on boxing, actually. We know he bet on the horses and he bet on his own team, in baseball to win and bet, I guess, NFL games. He was big on betting on that. I mean, but it hits home.
That it really does for guys our age because we grew up with him. Yeah. I became I'm a Reds fan because of Rose, a Bruins fan because of Orr, and a Dolphins fan because of Zonka.
I'm just thinking of something. Wouldn't that have been a more appropriate name for boxer? But it was more appropriate for Pete Rose, but you'd think the Hit King. Could you imagine a nickname for boxer if Pete Rose didn't have that? Mike the Hit King Tyson. That would have caught on maybe, right?
Iron Mike Tyson. Yeah, that caught on.
King, yeah. Tommy the Hitman Hearns. Instead of Hitman, Hit King. Okay, I mean, whatever, but it's, it hits home. I mean, we'll be talking. I'm going to turn on the news when we're done with this show, Frank, and just, hear a lot of the accolades to this, to that. Come on. But Pete Rose, in ways, Frank, was his own worst enemy. Let's be honest about it. Had he not denied betting on baseball all those years, he just dug himself a bigger hole. Everyone knew he bet on it. And he kept denying it. And finally, he admitted it. And even then, he may have had a chance to get back in the Hall of Fame. They wanted to see would he configure his life, get it in order. But he enjoyed betting, And
Jack, I still think
the ironic part about it, you can bet on these games now.
I still think, and this applies across the board, not just the baseball players, but I'm sorry. I have less respect for Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens with their steroid use than I do Pete Rose betting on baseball. I know what the clubhouse says and the blue laws.
What about the boxers on steroids? I mean,
same thing.
I'm not giving any names, but we know, some of them. And
but Jack, we don't complain because we know that most of the guys in combat sports have done some steroids or some kind of growth hormone.
Yeah. Well, speaking of combat sports, you heard Dana White getting into boxing now, and I don't think Dana White is going to last to make his mark in boxing. I don't like Dana White, and to me, it's something he did in regards to the Boxing Writers Association of America. The first year where they wanted to get in boxing, they got involved with the banquet, contributed to the bags. Then after that, they wouldn't do the simplest thing like donate T-shirts. And he did not that he was obligated to do it, but when you look at Dana White, what he's paying the fighters in the UFC, I mean, I don't know what he expects to do in boxing. Does he expect to put on a Fury Usyk fight and give one guy $4 million and the other guy $2 million? That's maybe Dana White's mentality. I don't know, but I don't think Dana White's going to succeed in boxing. I mean, with the UFC, it's kind of he has a hold over these guys. These guys have nowhere really to go.
He's a one-man dictator. He is.
I mean, look at in a championship fight. What a champion gets, $500,000 or whatever. I don't know the exact purse, but I don't believe I'm far away at all.
But he does make his best guys fight each other.
Well, these guys have nowhere else to go. I mean, they're not like in demand. There are not as many other promoters around who can stage fights, like compete against the UFC. Because if there was competition, he would have to up the ante. And look, what Dana White's doing is legal. I'm not saying he's a crook, but my perception of Dana White is he's not a good guy. That's my perception. Okay, I'm entitled to have my perception.
Absolutely. What I liked about him when he first got into MMA and the UFC, he said, we're going to be different than boxing. He said, because we're going to make the fighters the stars. He goes, if you watch HBO, all Lampley and Merchant do are put down the fighters. He goes, there's the stars, but he doesn't pay them. But the one thing I like about him, Jack, and I got a feeling this is not many people are going to agree with me here, but I like what he did during COVID, that he staged fights on his own island, and I like that he doesn't get involved politically, as far as he doesn't care what his fighters say or do. They're allowed to have their own thoughts, and whether he agrees with them or not, he doesn't get involved. And I like that. I don't think that's the way it is in the boxing world.
You could say what you want in boxing. Are you kidding me? Oh, speaking of that, Devin Haney has a lawsuit now against Ryan Garcia, claiming that Garcia was trying to hurt him. I'm sorry, Frank. I know you don't like Garcia. You resent him deeply for coming 3.5
I don't agree with
pounds
Haney.
But I'm going to tell you this, and it was more than publicity. Bill Haney saying he was sending his son out to kill Ryan Garcia, saying, look, if he dies, he dies. You know, it's just the way it is. And you do that. That to me, it's crossing a line. You could say, well, it's a buildup. You want to psych the guy out. No, there's certain lines you don't cross. And you don't cross it. So if Garcia retaliated by figuring, through this guy, I'm going to come over the weight, but you know how I'm going to get my money back, Frank? Garcia reportedly bet $2 million of his purse and made $12 million, figuring, and that's going to pay my fine for going over the weight. Okay?
It was very shrewd.
So, it absolutely. And now Haney is complaining, and he's putting down Eddie Hearn. He's not even Eddie Hearn's fighter. And he calls Eddie Hearn up 6 a.m, and he wants tickets and this and that. And he's basically stiffed Eddie Hearn. Eddie Hearn flew to New York to support Haney before the fight with Garcia. It wasn't Eddie Hearn's promotion. Eddie Hearn had promoted Haney earlier, figuring they were going to do business afterwards, and that hadn't quite become a reality. You know, the Haneys act like they feel a sense of entitlement. Just listen to how vulgar Bill Haney is. Go to YouTube, get some of his interviews, the way he went at it with Floyd Mayweather and Adrian Broner. It was disgusting to hear.
I don't like it too, Jack. I don't think it's a good look, and I don't think it'll go anywhere. I'm
going to tell you what's not a good look, who I would expect a little more from, being that he's a promoter, Oscar De La Hoya. Have you seen his, what's it called, Pushback Thursdays, Clapback Thursdays?
No.
Every Thursday he comes on. You got to go, you got to see it. It is kind of funny. It is funny, I have to admit. He has some funny lines. He gets on, he insults Canelo Alvarez, he insults Eddie Hearn. I don't mean it's funny, the idea that he's insulting them, but his delivery is funny. It kind of makes me laugh the way he delivers it. And then he ends with an F you to them, using the full words on there. And he tries to make it humorous that way. To me, it's not becoming of a promoter, like that. You're supposed to have a certain leadership, a certain dignity, and Oscar's just lowering himself. And Eddie Hearn responded, making believe he was doing an FU Friday segment. The way he put De La Hoya down, with Garcia, not allowed to fight till September. And he says, you say you promote Jaime Munguia. I saw he was on the top-ranked show. You don't promote him anymore, and it goes back. It is a little funny, I got to admit, even though it's distasteful if you want to look at it seriously.
Let me ask you this. It's not a good look for Oscar, and he's been in a few situations that haven't been a good look for him.
You got to see it, Frank.
I'll check it out. I'll say this, though. One thing about Oscar, Jack, that we can say about him that we can't say about a lot of guys today is he fought everybody, and he fought them in their prime. Now, my issue was he never beat many of them conclusively. It was always a life and death struggle, decision, split decision. Some he was on the right side, some the wrong side. But I'll tell you what, Oscar was a tough guy. And he, you can't question his resume or who he fought, and he fought them in their prime.
Frank, every fighter, it kind of avoids someone, it seems, at some point. Just about everybody. Oscar, I agree with what you said. I mean, with the exception of the Pacquiao fight, let's throw that out. He was at the end of the line. All his
Right.
big fights seem, for the most part, seem to be close, one way or the other. The one guy that Oscar may have avoided a little bit, Bob Arum didn't want Oscar fighting him. I could kind of understand that.
Vernon
Winky Wright.
Forrest?
No, Winky Wright. Vernon wasn't quite on his radar at the time. But Winky Wright was a day, and Bob Arum said, oh, Oscar would beat Winky, but Winky would stink him out and make Oscar look bad in victory. That's why I'm not making the fight, because Winky would make Oscar look bad, but Oscar would beat him. That's what we hear. A fighter can say, I'm going to beat a guy easy. I'll do this, I'll do that. If there's a realistic chance to making the fight, you're listening to Canelo talk. Oh, I beat Crawford easy. I beat Benavidez without a problem. If it's no problem, fight these darn guys.
Jack, you're right. Why would he fight Winky Wright when he was the draw and the money? I could see that. I don't know how that fight goes. I might lean towards Winky. Again, I've had the arguments with guys about Oscar being a great or an all-time great. I think he's borderline great, definitely not all-time great under any metric.
No, listen, I said it before. I mean, De La Hoya against Mayweather in their primes, best 4 out of 7. Oscar wins a couple of them. Oscar wins 2 of them. Oscar wins 3 of them. I think Floyd beats him in a 7-game series, 4 fights to 3. That's at their primes, going at it, the 2 of them.
If they're at 147, I like Oscar to win that. But anything lower, I might go with Mayweather.
Well, yeah, you're not exactly the biggest Mayweather booster, but okay.
But I'm pretty objective, Jack. If we go by the fight they had, Oscar was shot and he barely won.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm basing it on. That, in a way, that could have been one of Oscar's great performances. He was past his prime, yet he ran Mayweather close.
That fight was even after 10 rounds. Mayweather won the last 2 rounds because Oscar either stopped jabbing or Mayweather made him stop jabbing, but that fight was close.
There's a category that's thought-provoking I never thought of before. And you love new categories that come up out of nowhere. Like I mentioned, like the coolest boxers of all time. You love that with Smoking Joe, where to put them. But this is
Robinson and Frazier. Yep.
The greatest fighters of all time. Listen to this, Frank, carefully, because this is thought-provoking. Only for the championship rounds. Last 3 rounds of a fight. Who are the greatest fighters the last 3 rounds of a fight? Obviously, certain guys we would eliminate like that, like a George Foreman, we wouldn't even give a thought to. We're talking about distance fights. Who would you trust the most over the last 3 rounds? A guy like Ali got another reserve usually, but even he was outfought a couple of times, but he wasn't always in the best of shape for the later rounds. But Mayweather is one of the greatest late round fighters in the history of boxing, meaning a guy stay with him for a while, but over the last 3 rounds or so, you could trust his conditioning that he.
That was the big thing with Floyd.
Right.
Jack, think about it. Mayweather was in shape for 25 years straight, never got out of shape.
Yeah, and he would.
He would be in that conversation.
Yeah, he wouldn't have beaten Madonna had he not been able to outlast them. Fights like that. He wouldn't have beaten Oscar if he wasn't able to outlast them in the later rounds. He had a certain conditioning which kind of allowed him to kind of separate himself from the opponent at the end of the fight.
The only time I don't think he came through was against Castillo the first time in the late rounds, because that's when Castillo actually came on.
Oh, okay. I don't remember which rounds. I remember I had that fight scored a draw. Him and Jose Luis Castillo.
Yeah, Mayweather got out to an early lead, then Castillo tracked him down and wore him down.
Okay. So with Anthony Joshua now, Frank, there was bound to be a little blowback. It's not, but it hasn't been that bad, the blame game, because I don't think the Joshua camp has anyone to blame. Even Eddie Hearn defended the trainer Ben Davison, but then again, how can you say Ben Davison is the greatest trainer alive now? Look at the way he resurrected Joshua's career. Joshua's a new guy because of Ben Davison training him. And then Joshua fails against Dubois. And how can you then put the blame on Ben Davison? The whole thing would seem hypocritical. Stephen Eddie Hearn says, well, it's not Ben Davison's fault. He gave AJ instructions. AJ didn't follow him. So now the excuse is AJ lost because he didn't follow instructions. I mean, and you hear that all the time with trainers, like as if it would have mattered. You know, when Dwayne Bobbitt got destroyed by Ken Norton 58 seconds, Eddie Futcher's in his corner. He said, well, Dwayne didn't follow the fight plan. Bobbitt could have followed any fight plan. He
said that about Tyson and Spinks, too. About Spinks against Tyson.
Spinks against yeah, well.
See, Jack, we've had this conversation before. I think the trainer is 5 to 10%, but the fighter needs that 5 to 10%. But what the problem with Joshua is, and Ben Davison can't fix it, Futch can't fix it, Dundee can't fix it, Benton can't fix it, is when he gets hit, his fundamentals go out the window, he backs straight up, his hands come down, and his technique, he becomes spaghetti, and he's not good. All I will say is this. There's one guy who, if he were alive today, I think could get the best out of Joshua, and you know who that is. That's Emmanuel Stewart. Emmanuel Stewart was great with the tall guys, with the jab and the big right hand that had to protect their chin. He taught them how to cover up. He taught them how to fight big. He did it with Lennox Lewis after he was iced twice, and he did it with Vladimir Klitschko. And I think, I'm not saying he could correct Joshua, but I think he could get him as far as his body will go, more so than any other trainer.
I agree with you, like the extra 10% or so, which could make all the difference. Lewis was a champion before he hooked up with Stewart, but Stewart did improve him. Lewis had his
best years under Stewart.
Right. He was a better fighter with Stewart.
And so did Klitschko.
Yeah. And listen, Stewart, too, keep in mind, he trained out for McCall when McCall stopped Lewis. He was in the other corner. So talk about being a difference maker. Yeah.
But Jack, then here's the other side of that. His prize pupil, who I love, and I hate bringing these fights up, but Tommy Hearns lost the two biggest fights in Emmanuel Stewart's career. He was in a corner against Leonard and a corner against Hagler. But the other guy was just a little better, and there's just nothing you could do. Like I said, Dundee could give Jimmy Ellis the perfect game plan how to fight Frazier, but he didn't have the guns or the physicality where Ali did, and that's the difference why Ali could beat Frazier and Ellis couldn't.
Well, you know, if you're capable of beating a guy, I was thinking the other day about the first Quarry-Frazier fight. Had that Jerry Quarry shown up against Jimmy Ellis, we talk best 4 out of 7. I see Ellis Quarry being a best 4 out of 7 type situation. You know, one guy would win 4-3, one guy would win maybe 4-2. But the Quarry who came out the way he did against Frazier, there's a good chance he would have beaten Ellis. A very good
I think that Quarry does beat Ellis.
Right, a very good possibility, but because he was really aggressive. But talking about the difference a trainer made, the Quarry that lost to Ellis could have still beaten Ellis if it wasn't for Angelo Dundee instructing him, don't follow Quarry to the ropes. Ellis followed the fight plan to a T. And
he did.
You know, and that played a big part in his
Quarry supposedly had a bad back in that fight. And, you know, one judge scored it a draw. I think Ellis and Quarry debating who had the better career is a very fascinating conversation. I could make a case for both guys. I mean, Ellis beat Chuvalo. Quarry didn't. Quarry beat Lyle and Shavers. Ellis didn't. And we could go on.
Who did bet against Joe Frazier? They each lost to him twice.
I think Ellis went more rounds, but I think Quarry got Frazier's attention more. And I think of the two, he would think Quarry was a tougher fight.
That's what I think Frazier might say, but consider this. Ellis won a few rounds in total against Frazier. Quarry won the first round of the Frazier fight in the round of the year classic. Ellis actually won the first round of the first fight with Frazier. And Ellis won the first three of the second fight, but Frazier wasn't in tip-top shape. You know, but it was still sandwiched between Frazier beating Quarry the second time and before the thrill in Manila.
But,
so it wasn't like,
but Jack, I would go by their first fight against Frazier in both cases because it was 69 and 70. Frazier's peaking in those years. Jerry and Jimmy are probably at their peak. Quarry, I thought, won the first two rounds against Frazier and didn't really start coming apart till the end of the third, fourth round, where Ellis, once Frazier caught him in that third round of their first fight, he never recovered. And, you know, Jack, there's something we don't talk about that much. And here's one that you would like. Of all the guys that got knocked down that we've seen, who showed the most heart and courage? Like, you can't believe they got up. And I think Jimmy Ellis, when he fought Frazier, that first fight, that left hook that knocked him down at the end of the round, that was as close to a left hook as Frazier ever threw, can even measure against the one he knocked Ali down. They were the two best shots he ever threw. And, you know, Ellis did beat the count in the Madison Square Garden fight with Frazier in 1970. I mean, he was not in a condition to fight, but he was not counted out. He beat the count.
Now, can you imagine Ellis was being allowed out for the fifth round? Frazier would have stopped him. I would think, you know, in a minute and a half later, you know, whatever.
I think in 30 seconds he gets him. Jimmy was in bad shape.
Well, yeah, he would have tried to exchange punches with Frazier as soon as the round began, but he would have been obliterated at that point. So, and no one was as good at stopping a fight as Angelo Dundee. He had this sense he knew how to protect the guy. You know, and, you know, he did that with Ellis in that fight. You know, a lot of other trainers would have sent Ellis out.
Okay, so Ellis getting up against Frazier was huge. Ali getting up against Frazier was huge. Obviously, Holmes getting up against Shavers.
Yeah.
Wilder getting up against Fury.
Fury getting up against Wilder.
Fury getting up against Wilder in their first fight. Who else?
If I'm getting off the topic, I'm sorry, Frank, but, you know, you rang a bell in my head when you mentioned Wilder. Did you see what Bob Arab said? He might not be that far up the mark. He said Joshua and Wilder through a match them against one another would be a heck of a big attraction. But I know Eddie Hearn is still saving Joshua for Tyson Fury, because even if Fury loses to Usyk, that's a major fight. It's still, you know, it's lost a little of its luster, but it's still very big for business. But it's interesting with these big names. You can milk them out. They can actually lose a few times. You know, they could keep coming back for good paydays. While they're getting stopped 2 fights in a row, beat 2 fights in a row. The Joseph Parker fight, I think it went the distance, right? That fight. But then he gets stopped by Zhang.
Jack, I have a question. As we're bouncing things off, I saw today, I think it was Ring Magazine's top 10 heavyweights. And obviously 1 and 2 were Usyk, Fury, the boy, and Parker. Let me ask you this. After Usyk, who has the next best wins in the division. Does the boy have a case?
I mean,
And how
Darrell
about
Miller.
Parker beating Zhang?
Yeah, I think Joseph Parker, you got to consider when he beat Wilder, Wilder was still favored. Now we look back, oh, Wilder was nothing. And then he did beat Zhang, and Zhang was
And he
coming
was an
off
underdog in that
stopping-
fight.
Zhang was coming up stopping Joyce twice, and Joyce was a big deal going into the Zhang fight. You know, he was hot property, and then Zhang derailed him twice, beating Herkovic and then beating Joshua. Yeah, I mean, I'd have to say Du Bois. You know, if I wanted to baby Du Bois in some way, I would get Joe Joyce an easy fight if there's such a thing. It's a shame that Joyce didn't beat Chisora, because if he beat Chisora, they could have made the rematch with Du Bois. Du Bois will beat Joyce easy, no problem now. But at least it's sellable based on Joyce having stopped them. So, yeah. But with Wilder, Joshua, it would kind of be an unfinished business fight. I think Joshua has a lot more left than Wilder. I think Wilder's really a shot fighter.
You know, Jack, I think you're right. I think at their best in 2018, I would have picked Joshua. A lot of people disagree with that. And if same thing where if Lennox Lewis would have fought Riddick Bowe in 93, I would have picked Bowe Bowe at that time. Now Lewis went on to get better after he was with Emmanuel, but you know, I saw two things this week, and we didn't plan to talk about that. But it's like we love this sport. It's in our blood. But Jack, there's a bad side to this sport that really bothers me sometimes, and I question myself for loving it. I saw two things this week, or the last 7 to 10 days, that really bothered me. I saw one, and I'm not going to say his name, but he was a very, very highly regarded, terrific, outstanding, borderline great fighter, two-time champion. And I heard him say that he wasn't sure if he was going to go to the Atlantic City Hall of Fame because he was short on money. And I'm thinking to myself, man, you were a two-time world champ. You fought a who's who list, and you're not sure you can go to a Hall of Fame dinner or weekend. And then the other one was, and I'm sure you saw this, did you see the story about Heather Hardy? She says that she can't see. Now, there's a girl that gave everything. She did MMA. She did boxing. She did it the right way. She was a crowd pleaser. And and she said, nobody cares. Nobody has reached out to her. She said she can't see. Now, I'm going to take her word for that. And I think to myself, the three most iconic fighters in history, in my opinion, are Ali, Lewis, and Robinson. Okay? And Jack, look at the trouble they all had in later life. So when we have guys that get out, as much as I like to bust on Mayweather, Jack, he is one of the few that was not destroyed by this sport. And there's something to be said for that.
Frank, it catches up to most fighters who've had a long, long career. It does. Here's a stat that's alarming. No former world champion ever lived to be 100 years old. I mean, that's an old age, don't get me wrong. I mean, that's a hard age to reach. Max Schmeling went to 99. Jake LaMotta would be used as an example. Oh, he took a lot of punches and he never had, you know, I hate to use the word punch drunk syndrome, you know, it didn't affect him and he lived to age 95. But LaMotta showed me the way he would tuck his chin in, and he really wasn't getting hit the way people thought he was. They let these fights go on too long, Frank. That's the
Jack,
problem.
how old was Archie Moore when he died? 87?
I don't remember the exact age. You'd have to look it up. Yeah.
I'm going to look it up as you're speaking. But the thing is, Look, everybody's skull is different. Archie Moore and Jake LaMotta had thick skulls, and that's probably why it didn't affect them. Look at George Foreman. I think he has a thick skull. He hasn't shown any signs.
You don't know that, Frank. You don't know that. He hasn't been in public view. Maybe he is showing the signs. It doesn't happen all at once. The speech doesn't have to be slurred. You know,
But Jack, he's 75 years old. Don't you think it would start kicking in?
maybe it has. Maybe it has. Sometimes it kicks in when the guy becomes 80 years old or so. You know, I've asked to interview certain fighters, old timers, and they kind of kept away from me. And sometimes someone close to them is going to tell me, well, they have problems, they're forgetful, they're this, they're that. You know, I've had former world champions who I'm friendly with, they'll call me up, they'll talk to me. And then, you know, I could speak to them a half hour later, they won't remember they spoke to me. One of them, a former world champion, okay, well known, he told me he wants to go back in the workforce. He has some ideas, this. And he was pressing me for things he can do and asking me, can I be a reference? Can I this? And what he was asking me to do, it wasn't realistic. So I said, sure, give me a call tomorrow. And as mean as this seems, I knew he wasn't going to remember tomorrow.
He never called?
The conversation. No, he wasn't going to remember the conversation with me. You know, it wasn't realistic. If I could have helped him out, believe me, I would have helped him out, you know? But then I won't mention what he was asking me to help him with this or that. And, you know, but it catches up to everybody, Frank. The greatest fighters, Joe Louis, Sugar Ray Robinson, like say Ali, they have a movie coming out on Willie Pep. Willie Pep, it caught up to him. It's a lot of fights, you know? It's sad. The guys who haven't had the long careers oftentimes escape that fate. But the guys who've had the long careers, you know, it's hit and miss, you know, and I don't want to name some possible candidates.
I'll give you two examples of guys that are roughly the same age, both all-time greats. And I think one is even probably in the eyes of most ranked higher than the other, although I would disagree with that. But if you think about it, Bernard Hopkins speaks fine today and has his, you made a face, he doesn't?
I'm not commenting. I haven't been around Bernard.
Okay.
The last time I didn't intentionally make the face.
Okay.
Let's leave it at that.
But I think Bernard, health-wise, is in a lot better condition than James Toney. And they both had a ton of fights. And one guy relied on his chin, Toney, as he got older. Hopkins was still tricky and invented ways to keep from getting beat up.
It catches up to guys at different times, Frank. Sometimes it takes about 25 years. And I'm talking about the guys who've had the long careers. A guy could retire at age 40. It might not affect him till he's age 75. You know, all of a sudden he's completely forgetful. Listen, and then we could hear this. Well, it could happen to anyone, whether they.
Jack, if a guy retires at 40 and it doesn't hit him till 75, I don't feel that bad because he's had 35 years, and that could happen. I know someone who's very close to me now, her and her husband, and she just turned 60, and she's got full-blown dementia. She doesn't even know who I am, okay? 60 years old. Nobody ever hit her in the head. She never got, was never in a bad accident or anything. So if a fighter retires at 40 and he has a full life for another 35 years, I don't think that's so bad. It's the guys that are in their 40s and 50s that can't get around or move where it bothers me.
Yeah. We'll have to pick up on this next week because we don't have enough time. I was going to ask you, if you were Muhammad Ali, who passed at 74, if you knew at age 20 you could live till age 94, you're not going to be poor, you'll be middle class, you won't be famous, no one will know who you are, but you can make a good enough living to be comfortable. Or B, the Ollie that everyone knew and pass at 74. Would you take the extra 20 years? You could say that about Abe Lincoln getting shot. Would you ever want to be president? Or just this guy who could live
I don't
longer?
think,
But look,
Jack, I think Ali would have signed on for what he did.
Prediction as we get off the Dolphin game, Tennessee and Miami tonight.
I can never pick Miami, Jack. They're bad. They're going to lose. They're going to be 1-3.
Detroit and Seattle. Come on,
Seattle.
Frank. We got to get off. Okay, Frank. Okay, till next.
How about
week.
you?
I like Tennessee to upset Miami and Detroit to beat Seattle.
Detroit, Seattle. I'm not strong on that one.
Okay.
Have
Frank,
a good night, Jack. We'll talk next week and start talking bitter beef and bibble.
Absolutely.